Welcome to Face to Face. This is a show about change and about what's next. It's a show that wants to ask questions, peel back the layers of our average everyday experience, and go beyond scratching the surface. We interview amazing people with incredible ideas and stories who have done wild, weird, and wonderful things. Remember that imagination shared creates collaboration. Collaboration creates community.
They are
co-creators. Inspires social change.
The creative folk.
I'm David Peck.
Not the only creative.
Is Face to
Some of the
Face.
creative folk connected to the Canadiana project. This is Canadiana. It's a web series. It's the second season. It's a documentary series that's, as they say, quote, on the hunt for the most incredible stories in Canadian history. Close quote. Now, Adam and I kind of have a few laughs about that, Ashley, as well. The three of us talking about how, typically Canadian history is kind of seen as dull and uninteresting and boring. And I think what's so wonderful and brilliant about this series, produced, by the way, by Unlikely Pair Productions, is that it's anything but dull. I mean, Canadian history is quite exciting in its own right, and as they go a little deeper in some of the stories, we talk about the assassination of Darcy McGee, the hidden story behind Vancouver's Twin Peaks. I mean, it does kind of on the surface sound kind of dull and uninteresting, I suppose, but buckle up. There's a lot more going on than meets the eye, and I think that's what's so wonderful, not only about the series, but about history, about Canada, about people, about stories. And this is all about misconceptions about, I would say, about Canadian history, but about people themselves. And so they get into a whole lot of issues, and they talk in a really interesting way too. By the way, this is using animation, and there's a comic thread throughout, and they avoid the classic talking head. This is I would say this is kind of about trying to set the record straight, and how we're surrounded by stories all the time. So don't touch that dial. Adam Bunch and Ashley Brook coming up, talking about their new web series, the Canadiana Project. And don't forget davidpecklive.com for more information about my writing and my speaking. You can get a hold of me there. Also, face-to-facelive.ca. There's so many other interviews there for you to check out. Got some really exciting ones coming up in the very near future. Don't forget you can support us financially on patreon.com. We'd really appreciate that. Help us, pay for some of the expenses here at Face to Face. And if you can't do that, I totally understand. I'd love for you, though, to leave a quote. You can do that on iTunes. It would be wonderful if you could support us in that way. Share it with your friends, your family, and people you don't even know. That could be really helpful, too. And don't forget that we have an email newsletter you can sign up for. And if you want to advertise on Face to Face, you can certainly do that too. Reach out to us through our email. And don't forget, I also appear on rabble.ca, and really proud to be there, and so many other podcasts, blogs, writers, journalists, people going a little deeper. News for the rest of us. Check it out, rabble.ca. Coming right up, the Canadiana Project with Ashley Brook and Adam Bunch. Well, welcome to Face to Face. We are joined by two very special guests here with us today. We've got Ashley Brook and Adam Bunch, creators, historians, filmmakers of the new Canadian series called Canadiana. Thanks for joining us today, Ashley and Adam.
Thanks for having us.
So where are you guys actually calling in from? We've kind of got a three-way call going on here. I'm in the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area. Ashley, are you in Toronto today?
Yes. Adam and I are both actually based in
Oh,
Toronto.
you're both in Toronto. Oh, come on. I was hoping Adam might have been calling in from, I don't know, Thailand or something. That would have been kind of fun. So why don't we...
Just the junction.
Just the junction. Okay, not quite Thailand. You can get some pretty good Thai food in the junction, but it's...
Definitely can.
Yeah, a little bit of a stretch. So why don't you guys, give me... I mean, I've certainly... I've seen a bit of the series. I've got lots of questions about history and Canada and storytelling, and your website calls you a group of is it a myth-shattering group of historians? Is that right?
I suppose you could call us that.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the genesis of the project? There's two other co-creators. There's four of you. Yeah, tell us about the team. Tell us about the series itself, and why you're doing this in the first place.
Well, my husband Kyle Kuko and I, we actually came up with the idea several years ago to do a Canadian history series, and we didn't really know how to go about it, but we were big fans of Adam Bunch's blog. He has a Toronto history blog called the Toronto Dreams Project, and we've been following that for some time, and we really liked his writing style and his tone on that. So we just kind of cold called him and asked him if he would be interested in co-writing and hosting a show with us. And then from there, we tried pitching it to a few different broadcasters, but it was the 150th at the time, and they'd already lined up Canadian history series long before then.
They'd been pitched out, had they?
Pitched. Yeah. It was sort of bad timing when we thought it would be good timing, but we were just a little too late there. So we ended up just, we brought in another co-creator, Joseph Beebe, and the four of us just went over 1-2 weekends and filmed a whole bunch of episodes ourselves. We actually just went to Montreal, Quebec City, and Ottawa. And we used that as to get our YouTube channel started, and then we used that as proof of concept for the Bell Fund, who ended up funding our subsequent episodes. So yeah, you can find us. We have, I think, 14 episodes at this point, and they're all available on our YouTube channel.
And that's youtube.com/Canadiana. And I'm going to spell it Canadiana. So, Adam, you went from blogger to host, narrator. Was this in the cards for you a few years back? Were you expecting this cold call, Adam?
I can't really say that I was, although the idea of doing something like this is something that, had a lot of appeal for a long time, but doesn't exist much in Canada. Somewhere like England, there are just dozens of historians and professionals and amateurs who get to host a lot of film and TV documentaries about their history. But in Canada, I think for a long time, we sort of had a misconception that Canadian history is dry and boring. A lot of people think it's maybe kind of unimportant, and that they think of us as a new country. So you just don't see very many hosted Canadian history series out there at all, whether it's on TV or YouTube or in the theaters. So when they did call, it was really exciting, a chance to get out there and tell some of the stories that people maybe haven't heard or have heard and think they know, but there's a much deeper and more fascinating story behind them. So it's neat, and getting out and getting to see the country, and especially the last year, being able to go west to BC and up to Yukon and Winnipeg and really dive into these stories has been quite an amazing experience.
So I think you touched on it. I mean, I was always under the impression, I'm several generation Canadian on one side, and I'm British on another, and depending on the day you ask me, I'm sort of proud of that, and other days not so much. But I've always, and I'm old enough to have sort of been, I think, brought up with some of that boring Canadian history. However, having said that, that was the tone. But I remember being just totally engaged by the whole Riel Rebellion and that whole portion of our history, and just thinking how, I almost romanticized it, I think, I guess I would have been an early teenager, I suppose, around the time I was learning about that. Do you think that is kind of shifting, though, that boring Canadian thing? Or would you say my kids are growing up with the same sort of sentiment?
I think it is shifting. I think there's sort of, in time, at the moment, more and more interest in what it means to be Canadian and how this country has come about, and sort of a pride on one hand and a wanting to understand our problems on the other, that there are those good stories and bad that I think a lot of people, and we've heard it over and over again, had that experience of sort of being taught in school dry lists of dates and events, and not stories, which, just as humans we connect with on that visceral level. And I think all of us, the four of us who've co-created the series, we're lucky enough to have really good and engaging history teachers that sort of taught us to see things through storytelling, which is the approach that we try to bring to these stories. And it is something that Canadian history, for one, it didn't start in 1867 with Confederation. There's a history that goes back of colonialism and settlers far beyond that, and then thousands and thousands of years of Indigenous history beyond that, and that of course, it's not all dry and boring. History is, everything that's ever happened, and in Canada that includes wars and rebellions and the American invasion and plagues and even assassinations, which is what we dive into in our most recent episode that we just posted on YouTube last week. It's all about the assassination of D'Arcy McGee, one of the fathers of Confederation, shot dead in the streets of Ottawa. And as Canadians, we grew up with stories of the assassination of Lincoln and of Kennedy, and we sort of know, many of us know that story, both of those stories, sort of like the back of our hand, or at least in more detail than any of us know about the assassination of D'Arcy McGee, or even George Brown, another father of Confederation who was assassinated, who maybe we'll tell a story about someday. We have all those stories, and I think we've just always looked elsewhere for thinking that the history of other places might be more exciting or more important, but the more you learn, once you start digging into Canadian history, you realize actually the history of this place is just as fascinating as the history of all those other places.
Adam, there's no need to go to Thailand. You can just hang out in the Junction. Exactly. when you mentioned like this notion of history starting for Canada and Confederation, it just made me think of, are you guys old enough to remember, Back to the Future, that where the Doc is programming the DeLorean to go back into time to the birth of Christ, I believe, and he writes in December 25th, and I think it's 0000 or something like that, as if there was this moment in time. Well, I think what you're talking about, though, and I certainly, and by the way, guys, congratulations! I love what you're doing with this, and I haven't seen the whole series. Obviously, 14's a lot, but they're short, they're pithy. There's a lot going on in each episode, it seems to me.
Yeah, I think that's something we're definitely striving for, is that every story, even if it's something that you could easily tell in a sentence, like D'Arcy McGee was assassinated, once you start digging, we really like sort of using those individual stories to start exploring bigger issues and bigger trends and historical topics. So D'Arcy McGee, to take him as an example again, was an Irish immigrant who'd been sort of a revolutionary freedom fighter against British rule in Ireland, and came here and became sort of a loyal British subject who saw himself as very Canadian and very interested in, as one of the fathers of Confederation and building a British-Canadian nation here, who was shot dead, most people think, by Fenian revolutionaries who saw him as a traitor, who ties into stories of how huge and important Irish immigration was to Canada at the time, and battles between Protestants and Catholics that I think people don't realize how big that was a part of Canadian history. In Toronto, there were riots in the street every year and people shot dead, and the St. Patrick's Day parade was banned for more than a century. So you get the hopefully very fascinating sort of mystery of McGee getting murdered and this question of whether the man who was hanged for the crime actually committed the murder. But it also ties into sort of those broader stories, which we try to explore as much as we can within those sort of short, pithy videos.
I think what's so beautiful too about just what you guys are doing is that and I can't think of the quote right now, but it's about connecting the dots to some degree. For me anyway, and isn't that what history is about? It's about, context and about clarity and hopefully understanding ourselves better and how we relate to others and so on. I mean, it can be a lot of other things too. It can be certainly used for both good and ill, I suppose. But for me, it's about that thread, right? And you start to pull the thread and you kind of find out what else it's connected to. I think that's does that make sense, Ashley?
Yeah, no, I think like at the beginning we were kind of debating, should we be making, short 1-minute videos that are like people can watch really quickly and their attention span won't wear out. And we realized that the more nuanced and layered stories are actually going to be more popular and people want those. So it's partly that too, because we didn't actually know at first what type of thing people wanted from a Canadian History channel. But I think in Canada, we already have the Heritage Minutes.
The Heritage
and they're
Minutes,
1 minute long, and they're so quick, and you don't really get into any of the complexity of those stories. So that's something that we try to do.
Is there a model that you've used for each story that you've told, or have you kind of let it kind of I don't know about tell itself, but reveal itself as you've been doing the research? Is this about a morsel? Is this about an article that you read and say, hey, that's going to make a great episode, and then we're going to pack it into a 14-minute template, or is it way more nuanced than that?
I think all of our videos do sort of follow the same format, and we have certain rules. Like we'd never interview experts within our episodes. So we may interview people as supplementary content and post that on social, and we'd like to do that. But we try to avoid the broadcast style documentary.
Okay.
And we try to avoid talking heads, and we try to use animation as much as possible to make it more visually entertaining. But we come across these stories in all sorts of ways, whether it's just something we'd heard before or something we find in an article or a book that we've read. So there's no really, and we never say, oh, they're all going to be 15 minutes long. We write them and we see how long they end up, and we like them to take the time that they need.
Ashley, before I ask Adam this question, what's the most for you so far? 14 episodes, and you've probably got others, in production, and you're thinking about third season and all that. What's for you so far the most surprising story where you've kind of went, wow, never knew that one before?
I would have said the Darcy McGee episode, but Adam's spoken about that a bit. I think one of our other popular ones is our Sudbury episode.
Okay.
Which was really fun to film. We actually went underneath Sudbury. There is a laboratory called Snow Lab, which studies dark matter. And some people don't expect that. They think Sudbury is a mining town. But the history of that is much more complicated. The reason that Sudbury is a mining town is because a comet hit so many years ago, and Adam will be able to tell this a lot better than I will, but Adam, why don't you?
Adam, I think that was a cue for you to step in there, Adam. Yeah. And by the way, I'm really hoping to come away with a good understanding of what dark matter is by the end of our conversation today. Yeah.
Yeah, you and the physicists.
That's right. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, that episode sort of starts almost 2 billion years ago.
Nice.
With a comet hitting the spot where Sudbury is now, causing a massive crater. I think I can't remember the detail, but much bigger than the one left behind by the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs, that sort of pooled with ores, including nickel. So that's why there's a huge nickel deposit, the biggest in the world, I think, under Sudbury. So we sort of examine that and find traces of the comet impact that you can still see in the stones, and then travel, I think it's 2 kilometers beneath the surface of the Earth, where Snow Lab is a super protected from radiation laboratory where they can be looking for dark matter, and have been a huge experiment set up, hoping that they'll be able to detect it one day, that it'll strike inside the giant ball they have set up and confirm the fact that dark matter really does exist, which was one of the stories I was most surprised to find too, which is a good example of how I think we just sort of stumble across stories and keep our eyes open, and that they're everywhere. I was just watching a documentary, I think by the BBC, about the history of the universe, and the host showed up in Sudbury looking at some rocks, talking about a comet.
Oh, that's hilarious.
So, immediately, so to talk to Kyle and Ashley and Joseph and say, do you guys know this story? Is this something everybody knows? Because this seems crazy. And then, within a few months, we're in Sudbury, deep below the surface of the Earth, exploring that story.
You go down in like a small, tight elevator, or what's the story there?
You go down as if you're going down into the mines, and then you walk through one of the mine shafts for quite a ways. It's very hot. You have to wear all the mining equipment. And then you have to go through cleansing, like they clean all of your film equipment, obviously, and you have to shower and put on special equipment because it has to be so sanitary and no dust can get into that laboratory. So it was exciting for so many reasons.
So what about okay, so I'm already getting creeped out. What about the claustrophobia factor with any of your team?
None of us had a problem with that, thankfully.
Interesting. So it wasn't too tight. It was. I remember going through a tunnel in Vancouver, and it was about 1.5 miles long. And you could, once you came around a bend, you could sort of see the end, the light. You could actually see the light at the end of the tunnel, and that I was able to breathe a bit of a sigh of relief. I guess maybe I'm a bit of a freak over here. I'm not sure, but yeah, I wasn't a big fan of that. So yeah, was it? Did you say 2 miles below the surface?
Yeah, 2 kilometers.
Yeah, 2 kilometers. Sorry. Yeah, that's too far. That's too far. It's like, to me, that's like jumping out of an airplane. It's just, that's just, we weren't meant to do that. I think it's really fascinating to me, that, I mean, wow, what an opportunity for you guys, right? To step into just all these fascinating stories and lives and in this Canadian history that, frankly, I would think most of us don't know. I mean, when I first scrolled through the website and I looked at the list, I had no idea about the peaks in Vancouver. I mean, that's just on one level. But then once you actually get into the story, all the details and the nuances, and I think I'm talking again, Adam, Ashley, about that thread. There's something, I don't know. There's something kind of validating about that to me, and something very human. Anyway, just a bit of commentary there. Are you guys? Would you say, and either of you go for this? I'd love to hear from you both on this. But would you say there's a sense in which you're trying to set the record straight? Does that make sense? That question?
Yeah, and I think it sort of applies in a few different ways. One is the way we sort of already talked about, that idea that so many people think Canadian history is boring and recent and sort of uneventful, that we try to infuse in every episode is sort of a refutation of that whole idea and misconception.
Right.
And there are other ones too, stuff like, for instance, that episode about the peaks in Vancouver, which today are known as the Lions and are probably two of the, if not the two most famous mountains in Canada. They're where the BC Lions football team got their name, and the Lionsgate Bridge that has led to many other different names, Lionsgate Lager and Lionsgate Entertainment and places like that. So you think of them as the Lions, but they actually have a much older name, the Sisters, which came from the local Indigenous people and is a much, much older name with much deeper roots to the history of that place. The Lions got their name because another father of Confederation thought they looked like British lions, like the ones in Trafalgar Square. But the Sisters, that name's tied deeply to the history of that place for many generations before the first settlers arrived. So that's one, too. There was, I think, a real privilege for us to be able to trace that story and learn more about the Capellanos, who are
absolutely
Scottish peoples who.
Well, and how is it, and how it's connected to poetry, for crying out loud? I mean, this is wonderful stuff.
Yeah, so that too, that they told the story of the Sisters and sort of popularized it in early 1900s Vancouver through the help of Pauline Johnson, a Haudenosaunee poet from the Six Nations, not far outside Toronto, who was one of the most famous poets in Canada at the time. And that we were lucky enough to be able to go to Chiefswood, her childhood home on the territory of the Six Nations, and visit and film there. And then, too, have the Capellanos' great-granddaughter, Stephanie Mathias, who's an actor from shows like Da Vinci's Inquest and one of the 16 hereditary chiefs of the Squamish Nation, to read the passage from the legend. That is, definitely one of the most privileged moments I think we've had in the series, is getting to tell stories like that.
Is there a sense in which you, and this is for both of you as well, but a sense of respect almost? Is it crazy to say sort of like a little bit of awe? Inspiring some of these places, some of these moments, that some of the things that you're probably even in the telling of the story, I would think, that are being revealed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there are many. I think that's a big one. The
It-
story of Martha Black was another big one, physically and sort of storytelling wise. The cheese, sort of mostly best known as the second woman ever elected to Canadian Parliament, who grew up in Chicago and decided to come to Yukon during the gold rush, and did the Chilkoot Trail, which is a harrowing, death-defying route that most people turn back from, that she did while she was pregnant, wearing a corset and a long skirt. And we got to climb into a tiny little Cessna plane and fly over the Chilkoot Trail and a remote mountain range in the north, and over the Chilkoot Pass, which is this giant staircase carved out of ice that has about as many steps as the CN Tower does today. There was another one where it was just the awe of the landscape of this country and of the scale of some of our stories and some of the figures that call this place home.
That's a great phrase. The scale of some of our stories sounds like a good title for a book or a poem. Ashley, it sounds like you guys really need to be well insured on this series. Is that what I'm hearing? There's a lot of
we do have to have insurance,
Cessna
definitely.
airplanes 2 kilometers below the surface, ice staircases, these kinds of things. Yeah.
That's one of the reasons that we rely on the Bell Fund, and we're looking for other funding right now, actually. But there's no way we could, first of all, travel beyond Ontario, but just the cost of accessing some of these locations and insurance and everything like that.
Oh, it's got to be pretty crazy. Have you found that the show's been well received? I mean, you've won a couple of awards recently. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Tell our listeners about that. And we're going to remind everybody again, it's Canadiana.com is the website. And help me out if I get it wrong, but it's YouTube. Is it YouTube/Canadiana? Is that right?
YouTube.com/Canadiana.
There you go. Yeah, tell us about those awards and maybe unpack a little bit about how either easy or how difficult it is to make this Canadian series about Canada in Canada.
Well, we've been accepted to quite a few web festivals around the world recently. Some of them haven't happened yet, but New York Web Fest, which Adam attended in November. Miami Web Fest, Holly Web Festival, Sicily Web Fest, and we're nominated for Best Documentary Series at Yorkton Film Festival.
Nice.
As well as for an award for Best Editing from the Canadian Cinema Editors Organization, and that's actually the second year we've been nominated for that one. We've been well received, and the subscribers that we do have are very loyal, and the feedback that we receive is just so heartening. We get comments all the time saying, "I'd never heard this story before. I really hope you keep doing what you're doing." This is one of the ones we keep getting is this is the most underrated channel on YouTube.
Nice.
Very nice to hear.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
But yeah, we're still a new channel on YouTube, and it's hard as a small channel on YouTube to get the word out there. A lot of people don't know we exist still, so we're hovering around 3,000 subscribers right now, and we're hoping that will grow because, as we were talking about, it's very difficult to do this without outside funding, and to attract funders, you also have to show that you have an audience.
You've got an audience. You've got engagement of one kind or another.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say your audience, or have you guys thought about that the academic crowd, the younger academic crowd? I would.
Yeah, well, we have so McIntyre Media approached us last year. They're one of Canada's leading educational distributors, and they do all that. They actually pitch it and try to get it into schools across Canada. So it is available as a teaching aid.
Nice.
Within Canada. So we have that going. But anyone can also go to our channel and watch the videos without paying anything. So that's where we're at right now.
And are you talking about or thinking about a third season?
We definitely are. We'd love to go to the East Coast because we haven't, beyond Quebec, we haven't told any stories there yet. And we'd also like to go to the prairies. I think a lot of Canadian history series tend to skip over that part of Canada.
Right.
So yeah, we have a few stories in mind that we like to tell in those places if we can get some more funding.
Would you say a hope of yours is, and I would imagine that any one of the stories could apply to, but family driving by the two peaks, and again, either of you go for it here, and somebody now being able to talk about them, in a meaningful way. They're not just beautiful mountains that we can enjoy in the distance. They're actually rooted in context and community, and this is actually really the way it was. Would you say that's a hope so for you guys?
Yeah, that's absolutely. I think at part of the core of what we're hoping for is that there are all these stories all around us all the time that people don't realize are there, but are part of what Canada is today. It's not an accident that the country is here, and that the traditions and stories and institutions and even our roads and buildings all have histories that are tied to these stories. And hopefully, I don't think Canada's been particularly good in general at sharing those stories with each other and telling them in a particularly engaging way. So hopefully, the more we tell them and the more interesting we can make it and informative, the more those stories will get shared and sort of deepen our understanding of this place and ourselves and what it means to be Canadian.
So just to tie it back to my question about setting the record straight, and Adam, maybe this is a little more for you, but Ashley, love to hear your thoughts too. Does history repeat itself? Is that something that's on your mind as you're telling these stories? You must be obviously with the story of the two sisters, you're thinking about our Indigenous brothers and sisters and reconciliation. That's got to be on your mind. In fact, it comes out in the episode. So yeah, just wondering what your thoughts are. Why does somebody choose history over philosophy? Or sociology? So a couple questions there, but go where your heart desires.
I do think a lot of those stories are sort of ongoing. And yeah, as I was saying in answer to the last question, that it's no coincidence that our institutions and traditions and governments and systems are all set up the way they are.
Right.
That there's a historical reason they got set up that way that frequently gets lost or obscured. And I think that's maybe even more true of Indigenous issues today than most things, for sure. Then understanding how we ended up here and what really happened is an important part of understanding what needs to happen. History is literally everything that's ever happened. So understanding those things can, I think, teach us how to move forward and how we'll have to move forward. Helps you understand where other people might be coming from and the stories that they might know about their past and our collective past. All, I think, can really help to inform how we're going to be able to move forward on a huge number of issues, and how we'll be able to be successful and continue to build Canada and make it an even better place.
I love that all of this stuff is really kind of rooted in mystery and wonder. There's a detective element to all of this too, I would think, right? As you guys are doing your research, you get a morsel of a story, you go deeper, and I would imagine it's kind of like going through the old filing box. What's at the bottom? What are we going to discover next?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of... Sorry. Go ahead, Ashley.
No, I was just going to agree. We use the term detective all the time. And
I think yeah.
Even when we're structuring some of the episodes, they feel like especially our latest episode feels a bit like a detective story, or like we're uncovering the cold case of the assassination of Darcy McGee.
I love
process as well.
I love the fact that you can say that this guy in Ottawa was shot dead in the streets. It's a horrible thing for him and his family at the time, but it just you don't typically go there with Canadian history. You really don't, and we're kind of back to that same notion again. Well, I think it's wonderful that you're helping to dispel that myth. And for me, isn't it kind of about that there's just so much more going on than meets the eye, right? And it's about asking better questions and I guess I hope coming to a better understanding. A lot of the work that I've done over the last 15 or 20 years, as most of my listeners know, is in international development and I've been very fortunate to travel to quite a few different countries around the world, and I'm always just blown away at what I don't know. And I know that sounds almost kind of trite, but it's taken me a long time to sort of get there. And for me, being a good development worker is about listening. It's about asking good questions, I suppose, but it's really about listening, and it's about context. And I don't know if you agree with this, Adam, as the writer and the host and so on, but isn't that what history is kind of about?
Yeah, it is. Just listening and digging and being open to finding new things and learning new things. If we entered any of these episodes when we start doing the research thinking that we already knew the story, they wouldn't be anywhere near as good. And they probably would just be a minute long. But one of the great joys of working on Canadiana is that when you start digging, you just keep learning more. Endlessly fascinating connections and threads. And we can be deeply engaged in researching something for weeks and weeks on end and still be blown away by a fact that we had no clue was true until, right when we're working on the finishing touches of the episode. That no matter how much you know about something, and it happens too that once we've released it, we keep learning and end up regretting things we didn't know at the time. And sort of an endless process of learning and being surprised.
Well, that's cool. That probably adds a lot of energy, I would think, to the research and the writing and the shoot and all of that, and probably a deep desire to keep it going in perpetuity, I would think. Right? Are you guys thinking far ahead on this, like season 7, season 8? Ashley, is that what you're hoping for?
It's definitely what we would. Yeah, it's definitely the hope. We there's so many parts of the country to cover that we haven't touched yet, and so many stories. And what we were just talking about, it made me think of we have an episode called "The Love Triangle" that brought down Quebec, and originally that was just we heard about this cannonball that was lodged in a tree in Quebec City, and so we were going to do this mini episode about a cannonball in a tree, and then we found out this whole other side story that ended up taking over the episode about a love triangle that happened in the house beside that tree. You have to watch the episode, but it's stories like that. And also every time we're on a shoot, we come across new stories just being in those locations. When we were in Yukon, I don't know if Adam tells the story all the time. Kyle went to the washroom and saw a poster and came back, and this was like one of our last days in the Yukon, and was like, I found another episode.
Oh, that's cool.
And we basically were writing this new video on the spot and filming it on the spot just to get it in there. And that happens all over the country. So
yeah, there's
so much left to tell.
Yeah, no kidding. And I think that's a beautiful place to be in. And I think for me, without digging too far, it really is about that. We're all connected, we're all connected through story, and there's healing in telling stories. There's healing in sharing stories and listening to other people's stories. I mean, there's something incredibly sort of, I think, there's a reason why people like to gather around a fire, and it's not just, you know what I mean? And
It's someone asked me once if I considered myself, or if we consider ourselves teachers. And I didn't really know how to respond to that, but now that I think of it, we don't want to be seen as that. We're not giving history lessons. We're sharing stories. And we want those not to be the full, we want people to be then interested in that subject and go do their own further research. Like, we can't fit everything into an episode. We just want to entice people to learn more.
To peel back the layers. So sadly, we're going to have to wrap it up here in a couple minutes or less. Adam, is this a new career for you? Are you giving up on the writing and the blogging, or?
They're all, I think, just different facets of that storytelling and sharing sharing those stories and that history. So I think hopefully over time, some things will get busier at some times and a little less so at other times, opening up time for other things. So Canadiana hopefully will continue to be a very big part of that.
And can we give a little plug for your other work? It's the TorontoDreamsProject.com. Is that right?
Yeah, if you go there, you'll find links to the blog, and it sort of actually started as a fiction project sharing little dream-like short stories about people from Toronto's past that I print on little cards with little collages about them and leave in public places. So you can follow me on social media and see where I'm leaving those too. And a couple of years ago, I published sort of a history of Toronto called the Toronto Book of the Dead that you can find too, that shares sort of Toronto-centric stories of death as a way of sort of covering the whole history of the city.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I wondered about the coffee table book of, this project that you guys are working on at some point down the road. I don't know if there's any money in coffee table books or not. Maybe not, but it seems like a perfect setup for something like that.
Yeah, the stories the stories are so good. I think they lend themselves to so many formats. Mm-hmm. In Canadiana, especially, the places we get to go are so visually stunning frequently that they do lend themselves to that kind of visual storytelling.
Ashley, just before we wrap, you're looking for subscribers. You want people to share this with others, obviously teachers and social media gurus to dive in. So watch the episode, subscribe, share it with your friends. Anything else?
No, just youtube.com/Canadiana, and then we're also on all social media at This Is Canadiana. You can follow us there as well.
They are quite a lot of work and quite a lot of money to fly around the country, so we have a Patreon page too.
Nice.
If you want to sort of become a champion of our work and help us continue telling the stories without major funding, then even just a little $1 a month or so goes a long way. So you can just look up Canadiana on Patreon too.
Nice. Well, we've been talking with Ashley Brook and Adam Bunch today about their new web-based series, Canadiana. Thanks to you both for joining me today. I've really enjoyed our chat.
Thank you so much for having us.